that was a wonderful neighborhood, wonderful playmates, wonderful families. I made some just lifelong friends, in that.
Even though you were just there for 2 years.
Oh, yes. That was one of the things about being a military family, and especially when you were overseas, is that you most likely did not have your family, and so they became your family. And, you did holidays together, and we were there for Hurricane Eva, and it happened the week of Thanksgiving. I don't remember the year, but it was in the 80s. And we all had bought turkeys at the commissary that week to have for Thanksgiving. And with Hurricane Eva in our whole housing area, we lost power for days. And so it was, what do we do with our turkeys? Do you know, we had one couple from the ship, her husband was serving, that opened their home up, and we roasted turkeys all day long. It was one in, and then when that one was done, the next one went in. And that evening, we all hung out together that day. We played games. They were blessed to have power. We played games like table games, and just had a wonderful time of fellowship. And then that night, we all just pigged out. We ate turkey, and everybody said, "Oh, well, what part do you want?" And we had children. There were a lot of little ones there too. It was family. Yeah.
Wonderful.
It was.
What about the boys when they were in high school?
When the boys were in high school, we lived in San Diego. We were in Navy quarters, and that was a difficult time. That was a difficult time, and it's sad to me, but they went to a high school. They were both very good students, and that was, really a blessing. And that did help them to plug in and find their little niche. Tim, our former Marine, was an avid tennis player, and so that was kind of his baby. And our son, Matthew, was an avid student, and so he found his niche and his circle of friends. But the Navy quarters was located in an area that was, on one side you had military housing, you had enlisted housing, you had officers housing, and then you had a very affluent area that you were set down into. And the boys...
Of civilians?
Of civilians, okay. Yes. And many of our sons' really close friends were not military Navy brats. They were not. But there were a number of kids in the high school that really felt that the Navy or the military lifestyle was substandard, was not up to their lifestyle and their affluence level. And a lot of those kids drove BMWs and to high school, and our kids walked. And so there was a class system, and that was difficult for the boys because these were children that, both Matt and Tim, I would sometimes go pick them up from school, and Dad was deployed, happened to be during one of those school years, and we would have the sweetest times in the car. And if I'd received a letter from Dad, I'd read it first, and then I'd say, okay, you guys can read it. And they'd read it out loud in the car going home from school. And we had such sweet times, but one of the things that our boys did, I think, struggle with is that while they were having Christmas with Dad in the Persian Gulf, these kids were, going to, on big vacations and things with their families. That was kind of hard for them. But there's a bright side to this, and that is that we had found a wonderful church, and they had a dynamic youth group, and our boys plugged into that youth group. And I remember specifically our kids. They looked forward so much to all the activities, and they would go on Sunday, they'd go to church, and they'd have their, Sunday school class, and it would be with their youth group, and they'd have youth activities and things. But on Tuesday nights, they had Bible study, and it was at the church. And then on Thursday nights, and I may have mixed up the days, but on Thursdays, I believe, they would have nothing but volleyball in the family center. They played volleyball. They did all kinds of sports. They just had a blast. And there was a time when Tim, our former Marine, I believe he was in maybe 8th grade, and he was behind in some project at school, and I said, you know, honey, and it was Tuesday, and I said, you know what, I'm sorry, but I'm going to dock you on that. You need to work on that project. And it was on Tuesday night, and he burst into tears. That's how much he loved being there, and his brother Matthew was just the same. And so to balance the situation at school, which wasn't all negative, there were lots of positives and some wonderful teachers there that were very supportive, and a lot of military kids that just kind of hung together. Their youth group was just there. It was just life-saving for them. And so those years of high school actually were very positive for the most part. Let's see, help me with more.
Well, when did both of them join the military, or
Oh,
just-
no.
Okay. Tim did.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
tell me about Tim and when you started to realize perhaps that he was thinking of joining.
Well, we had, my husband and I, when Tim had graduated from high school, his brother was just 1 year and a half older. He had gone off to college there in San Diego and stayed there, but we moved back east for what turned out to be 13 years. And when we moved back, that is when our son Tim, he went with us and did not want to jump right into college. He took a little bit of a breather. And while we were back there, one day, just out of the blue, and this, I will say this is from Mom's perspective. I don't know how if Dad knew ahead of time and just didn't share it with me yet. One day, Tim came home, and he walked in, and I remember we were in the family room. He walked in, and he said, "Well, I'm joining the Marine Corps." And I caught my breath and kept my composure. And he said, "And the recruiter is going to stop by because he wants to meet my parents." And the recruiter was wonderful. I mean, we had such respect for him, and we just, really appreciated him. He took really good care of Tim in so many ways. He even would, after the announcement was made, and I had, without my son's knowledge, excused myself, went to the bedroom, down the hall, closed the door, went around. I just cried my eyes out. I did. Even though I was a military mom, I was a Navy wife. I wasn't a Marine Corps wife. And I knew enough about living by Marine families. I knew that their course of training was extremely vigorous. And I was very concerned. And you hear all the stereotypes of what's boot camp like. Well, for the Navy, it's one thing. For the Marine Corps, and he would go to Parris Island, South Carolina. I had heard a lot of really scary things that moms, have some issues with. And so I was just terrified for my son. Tim, his personality, he was a very tender-hearted young man, very tender-hearted. When he was a little boy, if he saw someone severely handicapped, there were tears in his eyes. It was always that way. He was just extremely empathetic. And when he was about, oh my goodness, I think he was in first grade actually, he had observed two handicapped people crossing the street, a busy street, and he burst into tears. And the reason was because one of the handicapped people was helping by basically dragging his friend to get him across the street quickly, and that just broke his heart. And from that point on, and for actually a number of years, Tim told me, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be," this was always cute to me, "I want to be a physiatrist." And he, of course, he meant physical therapist, but my little first grader, that was what he came up with. And he had such a heart for people who were handicapped. And when he was when we lived in Hawaii and he was in second grade, they had a program where they brought children to the school that were, for a day, who were very handicapped in wheelchairs. And he always would partner and be the little host or the guide for someone. And he'd come home telling me about his day, and how precious it was to be with this person. So this is my tender-hearted little boy. And my first thought was, oh my goodness, does someone survive Marine Corps boot camp if they're tender-hearted? Oh my goodness, are they just going to kill him? I mean, I say that, are they going to understand? And then I told my husband that evening after Tim had gone out, and he was just elated because we'd met the recruiter and all. I just said, oh, I don't want him to change. I don't want him to lose that tender heart. I was so afraid they would just, squash it out of him. Mm-hmm. That is not the case. He still today gets choked up when he tells a story about anything that has to do with someone that is hurting, someone that's in need. He's just still tender. So he didn't lose that, and I'm so glad.